So I think it's time to get started. I know that we were after the lunch break, so thank you so much for being here. It means a lot because you guys could still be at lunch enjoying lunch. So thank you for hearing the four of us talk and being interested on the topic of internal experiences. I'm seeing some people in the audience who I adore and I haven't said hello to yet, so hello all. Thank you, really. Thank you for attending this panel. We're very, very excited to present some things on internal experiences today. Sort of the order of things, Patrick Ryan next to me is going to present a sort of structure for this talk and overview of what internal experiences are. And then we're going to go on to Joe Kelly, myself, and then end up with Yuval. So thank you again. And I'll pass it over to Pat Ryan at this time to introduce us.
So we need to go advance the slide. So this concept of internal experience are experiences that are subjective. Experiences occur within our mind or body. It could include thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories. Internal experiences are often not observable, but they can be inferred by people's behavior. So the purpose of this talk is to stimulate an understanding and discussion on the role that internal experiences play in group involvement. So despite research in the area of cultic studies, there's very little literature regarding beliefs and the impact that internal experiences have, visions, feelings, spiritual states on a group member's commitment. You got that one. There are numerous concepts that focus on external factors. There are conditions for people being involved in group or group affiliation, conversion, or commitment, including deception, manipulation, coercion, coercive control, the works of Lifton, Dr. Singer, concepts of coercive control, influence, and deception. But this talk, we want to just focus on internal experiences. And we're going to talk about yoga, examples, transcendental meditation, guru devotion, and Christianity. And Yuval is going to explain the science behind all of this at the end. A little bit, yeah. Behind all of it. So an internal experience is a subjective experience that occurs within our mind and our body. Internal experiences are not always observable by others, but they can be inferred by the behavior reported by individuals that are experiencing them. Some examples of internal experiences include feelings. Feelings could be of love, hate, devotion, sensations, physical sensations in our body, memories, hearing things, inner speech, seeing things, and unsymbolized thinking. Feelings of expansion being not in our body. I think
in psychiatry, they might call it depersonalization, dissociation. But in the group, it was spiritualized.
So internal experiences play an important role in our lives. They influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. They also can be a source of pleasure, pain, and meaning. They're often fleeting and difficult to capture. They can be shared with other people through language, religion, poetry, beliefs, art, or people modeling particular behaviors. So to understand the context, understand the role, we want to talk about something we call context. And context, we propose, has two aspects. One is set, and the other one is setting. The set is one mindset, short to set. And the physical and social environment is the setting in which the individual has the experience. Sometimes referred to as the set and setting complex, if you want to Google it. So examples of set are the frames of reference, are a particular set of beliefs, ideas, rules, the way we live our lives. Our background, the historical and cultural context could also shape our internal experiences. Set refers to the mental state of a person that brings the experience, the thoughts, the mood, the expectations. And examples of setting are the environment, the physical setting, the scene, the backdrop, the social surroundings that can affect or foster a predicted experience. The environments may include modeled behavior like chanting, prayer, singing, breathing exercises, repetitive poses. Examples of modeling might be in a charismatic Christian type setting. Someone, you see this TV evangelist named Benny Hinn, and people come up and he touches them and they fall down. Frequently, there's someone in the audience, many people in the audience that are plants. And so those people know what they're supposed to do when he touches them. They fall down and they model the experience. So we'll look at this concept of set and setting in a number of different religious or spiritual traditions. So the first one is yoga, Kundalini, and chakras. So there is actually no scientific evidence that supports the existence of Kundalini or chakras. However, some scientists have argued that they correspond to physical body parts, particularly in the nervous system. The nervous system, which consists of a person's brain, spinal column, and nerves. So the set, the Kundalini chakra set, Kundalini is a Sanskrit term that means coiled or serpentine. In Hinduism, Kundalini is a form of divine feminine energy that is believed to be located at the base of the spine. It's also known as Shakti or goddess energy. Next one. Chakras, the concept of chakras arose in the early traditions of Hinduism. Beliefs differ among Indian traditions, with many Buddhist texts mentioning just 5 chakras, while Hindu texts mention 6, 7 chakras. Regardless of the number of chakras, the schema presents 5 chakras, 6 chakras, 7 chakras, 12 chakras. The practitioner usually experiences what that framework describes. So the following are some suggested manifestations of the rise of Kundalini in people. Practitioners report physical sensations, such as energy moving through the body, energy being trapped in areas of the body, often in these areas that are described in the set, the chakra system, where it's prescribed. Energy rushes, intense electrical energy circulating in the body, bubbling bliss, muscle twitches, cramps, spasms, itching, vibrations, prickling, tickling, stinging, crawling sensations, shaking, jerking. The energy feels unbearably strong sometimes and painful, often accompanied by shaking, jerking, spasms, feelings of intense heat, cold, warmth, tingling, disorientation, and sometimes discomfort. So, and now we go. So adopting the Kundalini chakra schema or belief gives rise to the framework for interpreting and generating the experience. Adopting the Kundalini chakra schema or belief gives rise to a framework for interpreting and generating the experience, confirming the theory, and once it conforms to it. The practitioner experiencing Kundalini as is presented and as it's modeled. So if the person comes from a system that says there's 5 chakras, that's what they experience. If it's 7 chakras, that's what they experience. If the system says that the energy sits at the base of the spine and moves up, that's what they experience. If the system says the energy comes from above and goes down, that's what they experience. So pardon me?
Toes.
Yeah, that's the code. So we're going to next slide. We're going to look at a little video in the transcendental meditation context, which is my background, of yogic flying. The set about this, before we do it, both the role that set and setting plays in yogic flying. So first, the set, the belief, is that in the Yoga Sutras of Maharishi Patanjali, a text from over 1,000 years ago, it's a branch of the Vedic literature, describes the first stages of yogic flying as hopping. That's the set. Yogic flying is a phenomenon of the TM City program in which the meditator hops in the air. In the yogic tradition, it's believed that when someone has achieved a level of enlightenment, they can fly. The setting, the physical setting, is seeing the backdrop, the surroundings, that this behavior of flying is modeled. So this will explain a little bit more It starts, next slide, it starts with a young man.
Tonight on Man Alive, the magician and the Maharishi. He was the guru to the stars, but the magician, Doug Henning, remains spellbound.
This is the greatest man on earth.
The outside world, this is a very bizarre thing. To absorb more and more of Maharishi.
All knowledge of Maharishi's teachings are taught on these courses where people are increased the amount of meditation they do. So you go away to an environment, usually isolated, where they increase the amount of meditation. They make you very suggestible. Then you hear repetitive tapes over and over and over again. A month on one subject, then another month on another subject. And you just sort of, it's in you. You don't know how it's there, but you believe it.
He said, the real magic is your own consciousness. He said, you're only using a little bit of your consciousness. If you expand your consciousness infinitely, then nothing is impossible. And I said, can we fly? And he said, yes. Can we walk through walls? And he said, of course. And he explained to me how this is possible, because when you experience pure consciousness, then you become the laws of nature and you can control them. And this is the absolute truth. And a lot of people listening to me saying this will say, that's not possible, but it is possible.
Maharishi defines reality for TMers. These advanced meditators believe they are about to fly because Maharishi tells them so. Some years ago, Maharishi added yogic flying to the most advanced and expensive meditation courses. Of course, the idea of flying for real mesmerized Doug Henning.
I do it every morning and every evening. I've never missed doing it because I look forward to it as I'm working. I think, oh, I'm getting a little tired. I can hardly wait to go in and jump on those mats and get rid of that stress. So it's a really, really beautiful thing. And it's a great gift that Maharishi's brought the world.
It also, Maharishi says, contributes to world peace. Group flying and group meditation create what he calls the Maharishi effect. Maharishi flyers love to get hopping.
It's really the start of flying like a bird through the air, although we come down immediately. But the inner experience is one of, like I clearly perceive that I don't only have a mind and I have a body, but I also have a soul.
It's absolutely. There is, I mean, we could describe it in many different ways, but the one thing personally I feel the most is this bubbling bliss going through the whole physiology, through your own mind, and you just feel totally free and totally happy. It's absolutely a wonderful experience. And this is, by the way, still the first stage of yogic flying. Yogic flying comes in 3 stages. The first stage of yogic flying is first when the body starts hopping through the air, as you've seen it. The second stage will be when you master it a little bit more and you are able to float in the air. And the third stage will be you really totally free all the time, not just one instant. Then you're able to fly fully through the air.
I am a social scientist, and I was happy enough to conduct complete extensive research into the effect on the whole society of Holland. And we had in the past, we had 3 times a group of 400 people flying like this together. It was a simple holiday, a vacation for the people. And then afterwards, I checked what happened to the crime rate and accident rate. And then it is clearly beyond the shadow of a doubt visible that there's a huge dip of criminality in that 2-week period that we were together.
Does TM have the powers claimed by its practitioners? What actually happens to the mind during extended meditation? Is TM self-hypnosis? At Sudbury's Laurentian University, Dr. Michael Persinger heads the Neuroscience Research Group.
Pauline, you want to start the pulse, use the amygdaloid format. The studies that have been done indicate that suggestibility goes with being a very effective TM learner. Now, that's not necessarily negative because suggestibility is tied to creativity. What we're concerned about as clinicians and as neuroscientists is that people who are highly suggestible are also prone to having pseudo memories or false memories formed. And by that, I mean that people who are highly suggestible can be told something and then they will remember it even though it's a bogus memory, it never happened, as if it did happen, and they're convinced it's real.
It's not only the ability to fly that Maharishi promises. He says TMers will be able to become invisible, to walk through walls, and to have the strength of an elephant. It's all a matter of belief.
Here you have these experiences. You feel like you floated, but yet you know that you're sitting down in this position, but you feel like you're floating. Then the TM explanation tells you what this means. And so the explanation for the simple physiology of movement is that you've been floating or that you're moving about. The interesting thing is that most of us have dreams of flying at night, at least once in a year. But when we wake up, we know it's a dream, because part of our brain that allows us to tell the difference between a dream and not a dream is the same part of the brain that allows us to talk about beliefs and non-beliefs. In the transcendental meditation setting, the belief
It's all encompassing.
So the set is the idea that this can happen. The setting where we learn this process, this many years before this video was made, it was called levitation, not yogic flying. And when we learned, in my case, it was a 3-month-long course, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, where my eyes were closed about 20 hours a day. I could go to the bathroom alone, watch TV, read newspapers, go home, write letters, where the day was structured down to seconds. And when we learned the formula to start flying, if it didn't happen, then a model would come, someone who had already started hopping, and they would model the experience to us. So modeling takes place. So in my case, the first time we learned the practice, nothing happened. And the second day into it, my body picked up and zoomed through the air, and I hit a wall about that far away. And so my memory is of flying through the air. So I have a bogus memory. I know people don't fly, but my internal experience is that it's real. And when one uses internal experience as the sole measure of what is accurate or inaccurate, the context can really control you. So Joe's going to talk about, in a similar way, we were both in TM, of his path to the next stage.
Yeah, so TM was my gateway cult, if you will. From there, I got involved with another group called the International Society of Divine Love. It was kind of what filled me up emotionally, because TM became very dry, very technique oriented. There was no real emotion and relationship to the teacher. And I craved it within that setting. I was raised Roman Catholic, and the idea of an emotional relationship with God was something that I learned from kindergarten, if you will. The nuns brought us up with the concept of angels and saints, extraordinary figures that were a part of our mythology around belief, and the excitement of mysticism was something that appealed to me even as a child. In fact, the nuns would point to me and say, "This kid's going to be a priest." And in some ways, I pursued my mysticism through these Eastern pathways. What's that?
The set.
Oh yeah, the set. In Hinduism, the Yuga cycle is a cyclical timeline of cosmic ages that represent the life stages of the universe. So the life stages of the universe are reflected in the human being. And you can go through those same life cycles that the universe is going through. There are 4 yugas or eras: Satya, which is the pure age; Treta, a little more decay; Dvarpa, little more decay; and our current yuga, which is Kali Yuga, which is the age of darkness. And it's in the Iron Age, the age of darkness, that you can only achieve higher spiritual attainments, according to this system, by virtue of your relationship with a spiritual teacher. And it's the age of quarrel. So the only way to unhook that relationship between the human being and the yuga is to develop a spiritual experience within that context. In Sat Yuga, there's the principal incarnation is white. It gets a little detailed here. In Treta, the color is red. In Dvarpa, huh? In Dvarpa, the yuga is blackish or blue, and in Kali, it's golden. So when I encountered the second guru, it was a phenomenally, powerful experience for me. Swami Prakashanand Saraswati was the founder of the International Society of Divine Love. He was also, we came to learn, he was wanted on Interpol for child sexual abuse. This developed many years after my initial involvement. Yet when I encountered him, he came to our community. He moved into the house next door. And as we know, when the disciple is ready, the guru comes. And these beliefs had been instilled in me during my experience with transcendental meditation. So the teacher appeared, and he began to train me in the spirit of bhakti yoga, as it was known. We were to be devoted to him. We were to live our life according to his principles, which were much more spiritual, much more potent. It really had an impact on me. So the difficulty was that I began to see the discrepancy between his behavior and my own internal experiences. But this passion I felt when the critics came to challenge me on my association with the Swami was due to the internal experience that drove my cult hopping adventure,
Which is golden light.
which was Golden Light.
In this particular age that we live in of Kali, the predicted avatar return, it has a golden hue. The guru comes, moves in. This is the set, if you know this idea, and then the setting, the people sitting and chanting, and Joe with eyes open sees the room filled with golden light. So internal experience, nothing anybody else saw. Internally, it verifies the theory, and the cycle starts.
So Yuval, do you want to?
No.
Yes,
If you want, you can go. Yeah.
No, we're good.
No, I think it's okay. Can you guys hear me all right? I'm going to really utilize the microphone. I know these guys can really vocalize, and that's awesome. I talk like a mouse sometimes. So I wanted to speak for a minute. Pat and Joe laid a really good foundation. How this works sort of set and setting when it comes to modeling these experiences in Hinduism. We looked at things like yogic flying and how when certain activities are modeled, it sort of paves the way in our brains for us to experience similar things. And as we know, that can be really dangerous in a group setting because internal experiences can further facilitate conversion, fear, panic, rage, sometimes joy. It could fall along the spectrum, and it can really confuse our experiences and what we think truth is with what is going on in that particular setting or situation. So within a Christian context, I am someone who was born and raised in a fundamentalist Christian offshoot. I wanted to just kind of use a college, surprisingly, that I attended as a sort of case study for how these behaviors can be modeled. So I was born and raised, I'm an MGA, multi-generational adult former member in the non-institutional churches of Christ. We were also known as the antis because we were anti-everything, which is really sad. It was really sad to be called the antis growing up. We were the a cappella only crowd. If any of you know about the a cappella only group, it was a sin to have any instrumental music in church, was what we believed. And for those of you who may be old enough in this room to remember, there was in the 1950s an institutional versus non-institutional debate amongst the mainline churches of Christ. And ultimately, the point of disagreement then and still to this day between the two subcamps is, can a congregation fund institutions like orphanages, a Christian college, or participate in missionary co-ops that make use of a sponsoring church? And the answer that the aunties fell upon was, of course not, because they're aunties. They're like, absolutely not. So in other words, any money that was given to the church must stay in the church. It couldn't have been donated outside of the church. That can be problematic. In the context of other groups, it could also be problematic when money goes outside. So obviously there's a spectrum there. But when this fight became really heated over institutionalism, Florida College was a college. Anyone heard of Billy Graham in the audience? Billy Graham actually attended the same college as I did just many, many years earlier when it wasn't a Church of Christ college. It was just a Bible institute back then. He had his vision on like the 9th hole of the golf course. And there's like a little plaque that marks that vision. So it's a very funny story, really. If you come and visit Tampa, I'll show you. There's also a 3-legged alligator behind the cafe that kids feed. So the Churches of Christ clearly sided with Florida College. And by the end of the 1950s, a magazine, it's called The Gospel Advocate, had targeted the college as a haven for radicals and marked its teachers and students as antis, according to the Encyclopedia of the Stone Campbell Movement. I actually took that picture. I was in that gym singing a lot of songs back in the day when I was a freshman. And although the bulk of its students are members of the Church of Christ, Florida College does not recruit through churches because the school is founded on the principles of the non-institutional Churches of Christ, which per its doctrine does not engage in congregational financial support of colleges. So the college had to get really creative as to how it recruited young members in the faith. And unfortunately, they thought that a really good way to pass that doctrinal loophole was through recruiting children. So the school actually gains name recognition by offering 21 one-week summer camps annually located across the United States. So approximately 4,000 children attend these summer camps with about 400 volunteers to teach and entertain them. And now we've all heard of, churches, and we've all heard of church camps, right? There was a really interesting documentary that came out called Jesus Camp. Children were having all kinds of internal experiences. If you want to learn about internal experiences in a Christian setting, Jesus Camp, the documentary, would be a great glimpse. But all this to say, sort of the setting, the use of these summer camps to recruit children was sort of the issue. That was sort of the problem. Unfortunately, this wasn't a camp that you could go read some Bible passages, maybe go canoeing, maybe make some new friends. The camp was for the specific purpose of recruiting children to attend Florida College. Because if you attend Florida College, you can feed back into the Churches of Christ across the United States and really be indoctrinated when you're in the college there. The college was taught by men who in the 1950s and 60s actually led this breakoff movement. So when it comes to looking at the setting, the physical setting, the scene or backdrop surrounding this, like I mentioned, these camps were run by passionate volunteers. But interestingly enough, when it comes to modeling, which we speak about, it provided a glimpse of the Florida College experience to all attending campers. So everything from social activities, chapel, a thing called Happy Mail. I know you guys won't know what that is, and that's okay. Character development, and of course, the building of lifelong friendships, all in a wholesome Christian-based environment happened. So in essence, the Florida College camp is set up much like Florida College. Buildings at camps are actually named after Florida College buildings. And we also have a special club. It's called the Alpha Club that helps campers move in. They also help people when they move into the college when they're ready to attend. So this sort of becomes problematic the college sends, the college sends people in admissions to come to these camps while these young children are away from their parents on a spiritual high, sort of having these internal experiences like what we talked about, but they twist it and use it as a tool to recruit children. It's a time to sweep in and say, you want to feel like you do at camp? Come to Florida College. You're going to feel exactly the same way. And unfortunately, that's oftentimes what this happens. There's this group of folks, it's called Camp Friends, and these are the college admissions officers who go around, they're sort of the student ambassadors, and their job is to, quote, share their love for Florida College at these various camps. My dear partner, Ryan, actually was a camp friend, and I've had his permission to share some of his experience today during this talk. This was actually the summer that we were engaged. I was graduating from college. He was a camp friend. You could tell from this picture, I just sort of X'd out the other people's names. He was in Indiana, Alabama, Virginia. And he traveled all over the country sharing his love for Florida College as a way to entice children to attend this school later on. He describes to me that one night a group of kids started singing a cappella hymns under the stars. This was traditional and one of the many aspects of the Church of Christ that they are the most proud of. And if you have participated in a cappella only singing, you know that it can be extremely, extremely powerful. They believe that, like I mentioned, having any instrumental music is a sin and a salvation issue. Ryan noticed the spiritual high that these kids were on, some as young as third graders. He realized that his role was to tell them that this is what attending Florida College is like. If they wanted to experience this sort of spiritual community again with other Christians, that they needed to attend Florida College, because that was his job. He found himself ultimately unable to fulfill the mission of being a camp friend without the cost of bronchitis and other sicknesses that ailed him all summer. He was sick from the idea of manipulating these vulnerable children who were away from their parents, their home, and experiencing a spiritual high unlike any other they've experienced, all for the sole purpose of recruiting them to attend Florida College. So when it comes to modeling, essentially the camps modeled what college life would be like at this spiritual institution. It normalized the expectations of Florida College, what to wear, what Bible passages to read, the experience of chapel very early in the morning, and provided them with a set of friendships that can be hard to find because we were in such a small sect and we were scattered all across the United States, and numbers in the churches of Christ aren't that good lately. So while this kind of community can be really positive for children, I think it's okay to, recognize that very good memories can be made at these camps. And many people did make very good memories at these camps. Unfortunately, from third grade onward and later into Florida College, the way that this is modeled is it becomes these children's sort of only option for their future. When you're as young as in the third grade and you start going to these camps and you have people telling you to attend Florida College, that becomes your only future. So I'm going to end with this, and then I'm going to pass it over to Yuval. In an article, I'm going to read just a passage from students who had experienced the summer camps. Students clad in jeans sang a cappella from Blue, Praise for the Lord hymnals as they gathered for chapel at Florida College on a recent Friday. The young men leading the service wore suits and ties, as is customary. Afterward, 19-year-old Corey Pearson and a group of friends chatted outside before their next class. Like many students, Pearson, a sophomore from Dade City, got to know many of her future classmates even before she arrived. Each summer, Florida College operates 21 one-week summer camps all over the nation, from California to Oregon, Louisiana to Minnesota, and to Florida from New Jersey. The camps, which draw over 4,000 young people, serve as the college's major recruiting tool. Since Florida College doesn't recruit through churches, We have to work a little harder to find out who our kids are and where they come from. That's why our camps are so important to us. In Pearson's case, she spent a week each summer for 8 years at Carolina's mountain camp in Flat Rock, North Carolina. Pearson said that it was truly a life-changing experience. My brother and I both attended the camp, and we never thought twice about the 10-hour drive up to camp or the fact that our family never went on a real summer vacation because of it. That honestly made me really sad to read that. Pearson added, I grew so much from going to camp. I learned a lot about what it was to be a young Christian and how to be just as effective in the Lord's army at the age of 13, all the way up until how old I am now at 30. I met friends there that I feel are the closest people in my life, and it had a huge impact on my deciding to attend Florida College. Like Pearson, Cassie Spargo, 19, from Florence, Kentucky, the state we're in now, said she never really considered any other college. Spargo attended the college's camp in Ohio for 9 years, said her brothers, sisters, mother, aunt, and uncles all attended Florida College. She ended by saying, it was a given for me to come here. So just from this short narrative, I hope it can kind of illustrate an example within a Christian context. You know, Pat and Joe talked about flying and Kundalini and things in Buddhism and Buddhism. But I think in Christian contexts, this is a small window into how certain camps can be modeled to serve as recruitment tools in specific instances and churches across the U.S. At this time, Yuval, I'm going to pass it to you.
I want to talk a little bit about respiratory alkalosis. This is, of course, a medical term, and it is something that people induce in themselves using breath work or what is called rebirthing, right? What other names it has? It has other names. Yeah, so I'll just give you a very brief.
Pranayama is another term.
Yeah, what?
Pranayama. It's
Pranayama.
breathing.
But basically, the acidity of our blood, which is very important, is affected by two things. Well, we'll get to the epileptics, and we can learn a lot from them soon. But our lungs take CO2 out of our blood, making our blood more alkaline, less acidic, and our kidneys bring CO2 back into our blood. And if you overbreathe, if you go and for a few minutes, and I don't recommend it, but you can try it, the lungs take out so much CO2, the kidneys can't keep up, and your blood becomes alkaline, becomes a base. And by definition, by the way, if you do it enough, you'll have a panic attack, which is defined in the DSM as alkalosis of the blood. And it's a negative experience. It feels bad. Your hands become, it's what was called lobstering by Margaret Singer. And I know a friend of mine, he's an emergency doctor. He says, you know, people show up at the ER in this condition and they have this and they feel bad and they're anxious. And for him, it was very surprising that people will induce this state purposefully. So this is a very negative, it's just a bad experience. Now, when you're done, you start breathing normally and you bring your blood acidity to normal levels, you can feel very, very good, right? So you get all this opiates, you might actually feel fantastic. But, you know, you can, but so the question is if you go, you have this, you go to do this thing, you overbreathe, you think you're getting rebirthed, and it's just mostly a negative experience, but people treat it as a very, very positive experience because they think that all this horrible feeling I had, that's actually me getting rid of traumas. So no pain, no gain. Therefore, I had all this pain, must have gotten great gain. And you can really convince yourself that this negative experience was actually a good experience, especially with the ending of it feeling so good that your blood is back to being normal. So that's just one example of how an internal experience, which in this case is mainly negative, And also it can happen to you without the overbreathing. So if it happens to you, go to see a doctor. But even though it's a bad experience, people think it is a good experience and they pay money and they put a lot of effort and it's very memorable. Now, what in many cases, this variety of weird kind of experience where it might be floating and might be a audio experience with a cappella, those are just the trigger that brings about the emotion of awe. Awe, A-W-E, it's a weird word, but this emotion can make you feel that you are understanding things are really real. So it's not just that it's real, it's really real. And in my talk at 4 o'clock, in 2 hours, I'll talk about how you induce awe experiences, but I'll just give a slight preview here. One of the main channels to induce awe experiences is to have an experience that is sufficiently anomalous. It's sufficiently unusual. So that could be seeing a miracle. That could be a celebrity. If Mick Jagger walked in the door, we might all feel awe. You can get it from a group. You can get it from a seizure, but that's not, that's the direct route to the experience. But these awe experiences happen because you interpret the unusual somatic experience or internal experience in a way that is treating it as if it is sufficiently anomalous or strange or also connected with awe. That's why when you saw the golden light, the fact that it surprised you, the fact that this was not a usual thing, the fact that you didn't expect it, in a way made it a lot more potent in inducing awe. So if you guys would now go to a rebirthing ceremony and people would ask you to rebreathe and you're like, oh my, am I gonna feel this shitty, the hands will start cramping and I'll feel tingling. You might not feel awe because you're expecting, that this is, so the expectations, of course, makes huge differences, but the internal experiences can be, seeing is believing. I experienced it myself. Who are you going to tell me that what I experienced? But awe manipulates us. Awe makes us feel that, as I said, it's the really real. And I'll just get into that before I go into how these things feel. In my larger theory, which I talked about in previous lectures at ICSA, so some of you might have heard this, I talk a lot about the connection between awe, the emotion, and the emotion of love. So love, you can have child to parent, parent to child, teenager to parent, very different. Romantic love between siblings, love of country, love of God. But awe experiences are, I think that to understand their power and how an experience can be an argument, right? Because an experience is not an argument. An experience is an experience. An argument is an argument. But there are certain experiences that function as an argument. And with the case of love, you can see it very clearly that if someone puts a baby on your doorstep, you can have an involuntary experience that will make you adopt the baby, change your life drastically, create a commitment, put on rose-colored glasses, develop a sensitivity to criticism, right? All those things that are very natural. And regarding the adoption of a baby and regarding the responsibilities that now you need to, all this stuff. So there we have a very intuitive example of an experience functioning as an argument, functioning as, well, there's a baby, therefore I must take care of it, I help it flourish, et cetera, okay? So if you have any questions, I guess, how much time should we leave for questions and answers?
We're good.
Yeah, but at the end, we'll leave 15 minutes, because I can talk a lot. So here we have the temporal lobe epilepsy. Temporal lobe epilepsy is a type of epilepsy. So a lot of epileptics are not temporal lobe epileptics. This epilepsy doesn't always come with the grand mal seizures that people associate with epilepsy. So someone, even if they don't have the shaking on the floor seizures, they might have other seizures that manifest differently. And those people, these temporal lobe epileptics, feel awe a lot, all the time, and they are fascinating. They convert a lot. They're obsessed with religiosity. Neurologists call them, most of them call them enhanced religiosity, or I mean, they're just very, they're fervent. And they display a lot of really interesting traits. I mean, I talked about this, you know, a few years ago. So, and I'll just give you a little bit of quotes of what people say about it. This is the Geschwind, one of the people who founded this epilepsy. And by the way, this epilepsy is from the early 80s. So before that, people didn't know that this isn't even an option. So the behavior of the temporal lobe epileptic has been characterized by the persistent theme of religiosity. Their lives are full of repeated peaks of mystical experiences and multiple conversions. They are obsessed by moral issues and the experience of God and fulfillment. Give you another, this is from Persinger. The gut feeling of the experience is an extension of the sense of familiarity and the alteration in the evaluative capacity of the epileptic seizures. For a brief moment during the temporal lobe transient, which is the seizure, a person peers into another realm and experiences familiarity. This other realm has many names: heaven, the world of spirits, and other dimensions. Okay, so here we have a neurologist, these are both neurologists, telling us that these people, they have these internal experiences, but unlike regular internal experiences, which might be surprising, and the set is the one that gives the content, many times here, because there's no setting, nothing happened. This guy was just at home and suddenly they are brought into the realm of knowing. And so it's and as we see, let's see the third quote. And this is Persinger, the guy we saw being interviewed in the previous video. I cannot overemphasize the importance of the sense of conviction produced by these experiences. Following these small alterations in the temporal lobe, the person becomes convinced that what he or she has experienced is absolutely right. No amount of rational conversation or data can sway their opinion. The basic mentality appears to be, once you're on the side of God, anything he says goes. All decisions become simple-minded, all or none propositions. Something is either right or wrong, or matter, good or evil. We have and this comes into some of the extra traits that come with temporal lobe epilepsy. And by the way, this kind of epilepsy, because you can get it from a blood clot, from encephalitis, from getting hit in the side of the head, we can very easily compare people before and after they were epileptics. So we can see the difference in a way that with other mental illnesses, we don't really have that opportunity to see what a person was like without the condition. Here we can. So it's actually, we can understand it quite well. So here are two books. The one on the left is, I think, is a classic, and a neurophysiological basis of God beliefs by Persinger from 1987. Not easy to get, but your library might have it. And Seized is from the early 2000s, temporal lobe epilepsy as a medical, historical, and artistic phenomenon, because there's a lot of artists, especially writers, that suffer from temporal lobe epilepsy. So it's because graphomania, writing a whole hell of a lot of text, is one of the symptoms, depending on which side of the brain you have it in. Okay, so these are some, and I won't have time to get into much of this because we're talking about just what it feels like. So you have the causes, which is the subject of my talk at 4 o'clock. If you guys want to come, then there's what it feels like and the effects. And let me just go over the experiences, because the others at 4 o'clock, but I'll talk about the others, and they're very interesting. But so how awe experiences feel is because we know that temporal lobe epileptics feel awe all the time, we can look at some of these functions that are associated with the temporal lobe. And of course, you need to take I'm not saying that these functions happen in the temporal lobe, they happen in all the brain. Just that the difference in the temporal lobe makes a difference for hearing, smelling, etc. Okay, so it is actually connected to other parts of the brain, but the difference in here makes a difference in how you experience. So let's look at some of these and see how they're relevant. So we have hearing. Hearing is particularly good at inducing awe. That's why music is very emotionally effective. A lot of parts of our hearing mechanisms are very close to the amygdala and the hippocampus and different parts of the brain that are related to emotion, which are not they're not cortical. So, but anyway, now this connection between hearing and awe experience means that proselytizing and convincing people is actually more effective through radio than through reading or through television. Now, of course, today we have a lot of television, like news channels that people don't look at. They just play them and they just listen to them while they do stuff in the house, while they cook. So it's actually also hearing, but it's why political radio is a lot more effective than other modes. It can also possibly explain why in the golden age of radio, we've had the most fervent period of our history where we had the most popular American president, and a certain Adolf was very popular over in Europe. And of course, under Nazi Germany, you were given a radio to have in your house so you can listen to speeches. And when you walk down the street, the audio would be blaring. Also, when people hallucinate audio, they're much more likely to take it seriously and be convinced that they need to do it. When you hallucinate visually, in most cases, you know that's not real. I'm just saying things. Things are weird. I saw this thing. I knew it was hallucinating. When you hear voices, you don't necessarily know that that's not something you need to obey, right? It's command hallucinations are almost always auditory. Then there's the emotional impact of music, which, as I said, and just interestingly, Canetti talks about how the slower beat music, which is many times the ones that are used, that it's connected in our mind to the footsteps of large animals. While fast beat music is like the stampede of a herd of animals, right? So we'll see a connection to vastness and to large things. And so possibly this addition of music with the slow beat, right? 3 seconds, if that's the footprints of steps of an animal, that's a large animal, right? So who knows if that's true or not, but that's been speculated. So smelling, of course, is associated with memory, and there's tasting, which is also, but now we get to the vestibular sense. Now, the vestibular sense is the sense of balance and motion. It is the sense of how we feel, that we're floating, that we're feeling light, that we're walking on air, that we are flying, that we are, or even heavy, right? You can feel heavy. Or if you don't feel your weight at all, that would be a negative hallucination. You're having a vestibular negative, where you don't feel like you're heavy or but many times awe experience do have a vestibular component. So that means that when you do feel awe, you feel like you're lighter, you feel like you're floating. You can have actual vestibular hallucinations. If you sit down and meditate and you feel like you're weightless, that's a vestibular hallucination. And those are very common with awe. So when you manipulate yourself by and believe you had a flying experience, obviously that is very, very likely to come with the feeling of awe and the sense of the really real. This is not just ordinary, well, I just flew to the other side of the board. And normally I walk, now I flew, it's the same thing. No, this involves awe, and awe is important and really real and needs to be taken seriously. This is not laughing matter. So this vestibular component, you see it in people that sometimes will be shaking on the floor of the church. When they're or when people have an awe experience, they'll start, you know, they'll fall down, or they'll need to sit down, or they'll start swaying. There's also, you can manipulate yourself to, if you want to feel more awe, you can start swaying or dancing or deafening, right? You start doing this while you pray. And there you have transcendental, and there's the spinning, people spinning. So you can stimulate your vestibular sense, and that helps you feel awe, because all of these things are both, they can be the products of awe, but they can also be the causes of awe. So they would be both. And as we know, there's many, many religious images that involve a vestibular component, right? So there's even fire, which is sort of weightless and moving up in a way, has a vestibular aspect to it. But many of our, everything that's holy or supernatural is usually weightless, right? Souls are weightless. Heaven is floating up above. Things are, so this and we have many terms, right? Seventh heaven, and you know, all this vestibular related terms. Okay, so this is back to, and related to the vestibular sense is our ability to assess the size of things. So when we and temporal lobe epileptics, they will have sometimes what are called Jacksonian seizures, or they're also called Alice in Wonderland seizures, where they feel like they're bigger and smaller, and that is part of their hallucination. But it's just tells you about how important this connection between this assessment of size and the temporal lobe. And vastness can be a very good inducer of awe, right? So for example, if you swim in the ocean and you see a whale, you might feel awe, right? Now, it might not be interpreted in a mystical way, but it might very well be. Also, large buildings, thinking of the galaxy, but with the vastness, there's also, normally vastness, we think of it as we are small and the universe is big, the galaxy is big, the church is big, the whale is big, but it can also go the other way around. It can be that we are big and the atom is small, the microbe is small. So if I would tell you that each one of you is made of millions, actually tens of millions of cells, and each one of those cells is much more sophisticated than the sun, you might, whoa, think about it and feel awe. Now, in this case, we are the vast ones, not, right? But, and that's the biology, right? There's the vastness induced awe from biology. We are the vast ones. In physics, we're the small ones usually. All right. Next, that's associated with the temporal lobe and with awe experience are the feelings of knowing. So the feelings of knowing on their face are a contradiction in term, right? A feeling is just a feeling, while knowing is actually knowing. But Mr. Robert Burton, who is also a neurologist, the third neurologist in this talk, he wrote this book about on being certain, believing you're right even when you're not. And he does a very good job explaining the feelings of knowing, which includes certainty, conviction, familiarity, realness, correctness, and truth. In humans, we have truth as well. And he analyzes them a lot by looking at places where they mess up. So for example, we can understand a lot about vision by looking at optical illusions. He looks at the feelings of knowing by looking at things like tip of the tongue sensation, where you know that you know something, but you don't know what it is that you know. And other kind of places where, you know, déjà vu, jamais vu, that are allow us to understand those feelings of knowing. But the feelings of knowing, they deceive us. They must deceive us. But one of the things that either triggers awe or amplifies awe is the feeling of an insight. So when you had a flying experience or you had a visual, a golden experience, it didn't just come with the feeling of knowing and awe. It also felt, now I understand. Now I know things. Now I'm certain about things. Now I had an insight. And the feelings of knowing, and this is more complicated, but they are incompatible with awe, with humor, I mean. So humor and awe are strangely incompatible for a number of reasons, and it's a fascinating subject. And for the young people, Tom Hanks acted in a movie called Philadelphia. Yeah. So it's they might think, well, what's the joke? But maybe I'll talk about this more at 4 o'clock. I'll just say maybe very briefly for that this incompatibility with awe and humor might be a reason why part of recovery, if you're able to look back at your involvement and have humor about it, not just laughter. Laughter can be without humor. Babies laugh, you know, tickling laugh causes laughter. But if you can have humor, if you can laugh at it humorously, then it's that memory cannot coexist with the emotion of awe, and that might be why that's a healthy part of recovery. But anyway, I can talk a lot about that, but we gotta go on. All right, so we got the feelings of knowing, and then there's the assessment of relevance and importance. And I think that, you know, which makes people feel like things are really real. And the connection that I assess to the psychology of love, and especially the emotions of that parental, not only there's all sorts of different loves, types of love interact, but in this case, when you're a parent, that child is really important, you know, their health, their well-being, their thriving. So this emotion manipulates and goes directly to our sense of relevance and importance. Things that we feel awe about can also be felt that they're relevant to everything, but that's a different discussion. So the temporal lobe is also associated with various types of emotions and emotional learning and dreaming. And as he said, the people who fly in their dreams a lot, this Persinger writes in his book, I don't know, maybe he said it later in the talk, or people that hallucinate smells, for example, it's easier for them to induce awe experiences in them. And of course, memory is, and the hippocampus and you know, parts of the brain that are associated with memory are inside the temporal lobe, even if they're not technically part of the temporal lobe. In language, that's at the edge of the temporal lobe, and literacy in one hemisphere. So one of our hands can do literacy, the other can't. Okay, so these are the functions associated with the temporal lobe, but I do think that they give us a nice roadmap to look and imagine how awe experiences feel. And so I'll just read. I'll do another couple of minutes. I'll plug tomorrow. There's a talk by John Hunter, and I read his dissertation, and I thought it was very good. And he talks about how by inducing stress and then sudden reduction of stress, you can induce hypomanic symptoms. So in healthy people that don't have bipolar, they don't have hypomania because they're not bipolar, but they do have the symptoms. And it could be hours, it could be days, maybe even a few days or a week. But those hypomanic symptoms, where you don't need to sleep, where you're talking all the time, where you're very optimistic, you're very impulsive, you're very, I don't know if, look up hypomania or mania, and it feels good, but it is very, very dangerous, and people really, really mess up their lives. But that's an example of, if you go to a large group awareness training, or you do some Nexium intensive, or some other cults, they stress you and then suddenly reduce the stress. You become hypomanic. This is an internal experience. Now, if you interpret that experience as a way, as it being sufficiently anomalous, this is strange, this is fantastic, this is great, but it's not expected, you don't know that this is what's going on, then you can interpret this internal experience as being sufficiently anomalous, and therefore it also induces awe. And this impulsivity with awe, right? So hypomania, you're impulsive. Awe, you feel things are really real. That's when you sign over your possessions to the cult. This is a particularly bad combination of things. That's where the forum makes you call all your friends and family and sign up for the next meeting, right? So they have this window of hypomanic behaviors where people really can ruin their lives. But that's just another example of how an internal experience, which can be manipulated in a way and interpreted in a way that can end inducing awe, which makes you feel things are really real. You can also end up in a state of fervor, which is a psychological state that I think is related to the state of being romantically infatuated. So that can last for years. But that's a different story. But internal experiences, when interpreted in a certain way, can be particularly good at inducing awe and particularly hard to argue against because you felt it yourself. This is not, your mouth can move and you tell me that what I felt wasn't real, but I know what I felt, I know what I experienced, and that's the winning argument. So thank you.
Thank you, Yuval. I want to say real quickly before we get to some questions, and I hope that people have questions. Awe is a very human experience. Awe in of itself isn't necessarily harmful at all. I mean, I love experiencing awe. I think at the end of the day, I put in my headphones and I listen to some cool music, and sometimes I experience some awe. But that's why I appreciate so much Pat sort of laying the groundwork when it comes to set and setting. We're looking at how awe in a particular set or setting can be used as a tool for manipulation, and can lead you to a place of accepting sort of this all-knowing premise and all-knowing truth, which has led people to dangerous places, certainly. And so awe in of itself isn't a dangerous thing. I wonder how many of you, after listening to Yuval, wonder if you need a brain scan. I know maybe I do, I don't know. But don't be alarmed if you have experienced awe. That's part of being human, and awe is powerful and good. If it's in a good context, awe is good. For example, if you are attending a good church and it's helped you in your recovery, that can be really powerful in a really good way. If you're attending a bad church that is very manipulative, awe can be a scary thing to start to experiencing. So I really appreciate all of you for providing some discussion on all kinds of different levels.